State of the industry. We have Steve Arnold with the California Cattlemen's Association, Catherine Van Dyke with CAF, Jeff Bitter, Allied Grape Growers, Jeff Vanderhoevel, Milk Producers Council. Steve is the current president of the California Cattlemen's Association, a nonprofit trade association representing the California ranches and beef producers. The Arnold family has farmed and ranched in San Luis Obispo County for 5 generations. Catherine is the water policy and organizing manager for the Community Alliance of Family Farmers, focusing on groundwater and support for family farmers. Jeff Bitter is the president of Allied Grape Growers, a grower-owned wine grape marketing association. The association is a leader in understanding supply-side dynamics in the California wine grape sectors. Jeff is the Director of Regulatory and Economic Affairs for Milk Producers Council, a nonprofit organization representing dairy farmers throughout California. Would you guys like to join us at the table up front here? We'd appreciate that. Welcome. I'm not sure who's going to go first here, but
You're the chairman. It's your
well,
choice.
I'd let the lady go first. That's always been a good move on my part. But you guys, if you've talked among yourself, either whatever you'd like to do.
I think whatever's easy for you all.
What do you have?
That works. We can do CAF.
Yep,
Good.
you're on,
Yep. Great. Microphone.
and welcome.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us today. We're really honored to be here, getting to speak with everyone. I'm going to look at my watch now so I don't yammer on and take time away from you all. My name is Catherine Van Dyke. I'm the Water Policy and Organizing Manager with CAF, the Community Alliance with Family Farmers. And we can go on to the next slide. So CAF is a nonprofit organization that's been around for 46 years, representing roughly 8,000 family farmers around California. We strive to build a movement of rural and urban people to foster family-scale agriculture that cares for the land, sustains local economies, and promotes justice. So what does that actually look like? We do a combination of policy advocacy and on-the-ground programs. Those little dots represent where staff are located around the state. So we're really talking to a wide variety of family farmers. This includes mixed vegetables, berries, citrus, stone fruit, nut orchards, livestock operations, and folks who are stacking those kinds of operations. Our programs include ecological farming, so sustainable pest management work, farm to market, helping people figure out where they're selling their products, and a variety of farmer services, so helping with food safety regulations, your organic certification, getting into different technologies. So we're talking to a really wide variety of people about a pretty wide scope of services. In terms of some context setting, I've included some data here from the most recent USDA census and their focus, they're particularly pulling their California data. Since the last ag census, we lost almost 7,500 small and mid-sized family farms, so looking at farms under 500 acres. Across the board, we see increasing consolidation, so more farms in the over 1,000 and over 2,000 acre category, and that the average farm size has increased by 35 acres. Despite this, these small-scale acreages are still the majority of who are farming businesses in California. 88% of farm businesses are under 500 acres and 31% are under 10 acres. So it's still a pretty significant portion of who makes up the fabric of our state's farming picture. When we think about challenges in the state of the industry for small farmers, the first thing that comes up is, of course, land access. And it's so interesting to contrast this with the earlier presentation on how land prices have been changing, but are still, for most small-scale growers, especially if you're beginning, really, really difficult to access. As was highlighted in that previous presentation, cheaper land usually has worse water access. Especially as we think about SGMA implementation, this is something that's really critical to think about who is accessing what land and what subsequent resources are necessary to be successful there. My work is focused on SGMA, running this outreach program to be working with UC-A&R on outreach to small farmers, since most of them don't know about SGMA, assume it won't apply to them, are struggling to really be part of understanding what's happening with that changing picture. Another key element is access to capital, thinking about emergency relief, especially when we think about climate emergencies, and increasingly access to insurance. Crop insurance has been a big topic for a number of different specialty crops. It's extremely difficult for folks who are diversified, right? When you're growing maybe over 20 different kinds of vegetables in your one business. Across California, I know this is not farm specific, but we increasingly see people in fire zones or areas that maybe historically haven't been fire zones and now are getting kicked off their insurance. And increasingly people are having insurance issues for sort of on-farm activities that they do to supplement that income. So thinking about being able to have tours, have people come onto the farm, the insurance issues for that are increasingly problematic for folks. Language barriers and capacity to comply with regulations is something that small family farmers can really struggle with. When you think about the variety of regulations that a business has to comply with, when it's just one individual or a family trying to manage it, often they struggle to have the capacity to successfully comply with a variety of regulations that are expected of our farming businesses. I think we're really grateful for the work that CDFA has put into expanding language access resources and really want to emphasize the continued need for that, because so many of our family farmers are not monolingual English speakers, and there's a really critical importance for having equitable language access, especially when we're thinking about complying with regulations. Another issue that is prevalent, again, across California, but especially for small farmers, is having affordable housing for farmers and farm workers close to where farm production is happening. And then just thinking about access to infrastructure. A lot of farmers are thinking about what they can do to be switching to drought-tolerant crops or crops that require less labor. But the pieces required to make that sort of switch successful can be out of reach for a lot of small farmers. But I do want to highlight some successes that we're thrilled to see at the local, state, and federal level. We're thrilled that funding has been put forward to the CDFA Farm to Community Food Hub. I think that has real potential for market access support for small farmers. We're thrilled to see that we know it's a difficult budget cycle, but we're thrilled that cuts to the CUSP, the California Underserved and Small Producer Program, are not moving forward, and we really want to push for CUSP funding for a variety of climate disasters. We are thrilled about recent emphasis on urban agriculture, both from CDFA and the Farm Service Agency. Honored to be supporting the continued work of the Land Equity Task Force, which we think is doing really critical work in the state. And are continuing to work on AB 2313. It's currently on suspense, but have high hopes for the cooperative tool sharing and ability for small farmers to be working together to purchase tools or to be thinking about development of cooperative businesses, especially when you think about having some more manpower for complying with a variety of expectations for small farmers. And finally, I just want to highlight that CAF is proud to celebrate the success that family farmers are having in feeding our communities and supporting sustainable livelihoods and remaining resilient in the face of climate change and changing market conditions. So I'll try and keep it brief. I'll pause there because I know we have a lot of interesting stuff to get through. Again, my name's Catherine. There's my email. I really welcome a continued conversation both today and onwards. Thank you.
Are you looking at me?
You're up.
Well, today I'd like to start off with a few of the highlights of our industry, the cattle industry. And I might be the only person at this table that can actually say that our industry is doing fairly well right now. We've had 2 really good years of rainfall back to back, which rarely happens. So we have a grass crop, and we have a market that we haven't seen in history. at this point. I mean, and let me just hop into the background, and I probably don't need to tell you, but we got here because of the drought conditions that we faced and the elimination of cows over that 17-year cycle from 2007 until today. So it's a supply and demand situation at its finest. We're a little concerned that the consumer may resist at certain price levels, but our industry has done a magnificent job of working on our export markets. So we have some really solid exporting programs going on. And also the genetics of the cattle industry have changed so much. Our product, we had a lot of trouble even getting to 50% choice in the past. Now we're up around 70 to 75% total. So you cannot attribute that to anything but genetics. So my hat's off to those breeders. Sale options in our world are sales yards. Most of our members are like Catherine's. They're pretty small, under 100 head. That option is a sales yard. They've been consolidating in my area. Sales yard disappeared and houses went in. So it's about 2.5 hours for us to go to Visalia. But there are, I don't know, 10, 12, 15 scattered throughout the state, quite a few right here, not quite a few, but several right here around Sacramento. The other thing that's really taken off in our industry is video marketing, big video marketing. And they will have a video in Reno, Nevada in June, just happened, where they might have, I don't even know how many head, thousands and thousands of thousands of head. But they've been videoed beforehand, and they get to that market, and it's the same drill, only by telephone. They have an auctioneer calling the bids, and you have reps in that room, and they roll through. It takes about 3 days. They roll through it. So, and we still have, of course, the direct ranch to buyer sales, order buyers in our case that come, if you have enough cattle, not me personally, but in the industry's case, and they'll come and, if you got 7 or 8 or 10 loads, they'll just come and negotiate directly with you. So on the production side of it, that's pretty much how our marketing works. And after having told you that story, I have a bit of an ask from CCA, California Cattlemen's Association, of which you already got my history though. But as you're aware, Central Valley Meats bought Cargill plant in Fresno there, I don't know, it's been some months ago. And interestingly, we had this discussion at a board level for CCA about the irony of a small family, although Brian Coelho is not small, but of a small family farmer buying out one of the big four. And that, the big four control 80% of the supply in the market in the world, but there's been a bit of a hiccup, and I don't think it's involved with the state. Billy Gatlin told me that's the Federal Department of Justice may be holding that up for monopoly considerations, which seems pretty ironic, to be honest with you. But our industry is totally in support of Central Valley Meats taking that plant over. It's a 1,500 head a day plant, and you can do the math on what that extrapolates to. It's a lot of people that work in that industry, and Brian Coelho, Central Valley Meats, has been a very brave guy and stepped out, done a lot of great things for the industry. He's just a really good guy. If the DOJ, federal DOJ shows up and you as a board have a chance, I hope you'll support our CCA position given that opportunity. Let me jump quickly to the issues we're currently facing, and a lot of them are the same, I'm sure, across this table. Catherine mentioned insurance, crop insurance, et cetera, but our problem is mostly based in just general fire insurance. Probably not hard for anybody in this room to know that we've been canceled. Everybody's been canceled. And the problem isn't necessarily with the cancelization. It's that the lending institutions require that insurance. So your only option, if you're in our industry, probably all four of our industries, is to go to the FAIR plan, which is kind of misnamed in my opinion, but that's the option. I'm gonna, if you don't mind, just quickly, I'm gonna give you a little anecdote about we have a winery, a small winery also. I'm sure Jeff can tell stories all day long, but we got a bill 3 years ago. My daughter called me and said, we just got an insurance bill for $32,000. And I said, whoa, call them back, tell them to drop the fire. Went to $1,800, so it dropped from 32 to 1,800. We have a building that is with three of them, but they're built tin, core tin, concrete underneath them with wine barrels inside of them. I mean, the chances of lighting that on fire with 10 gallons of gas are almost zero, but it just matters if you're in that designation, you're toast. So we now only carry liability on the winery and liability on our ranch because you just can't afford to insure that. I mean, you might as well not run cows, but if we do, you got to have liability. So that's a problem. We're also trying to work out now what we're going to do with the trucking proposals that have come about all electric vehicle fleets by whenever that is. And I want to tell you right now, that is never going to work with the technology we have now because you can't get enough batteries in an electric truck to get it over top of Highway 80 going east. And almost all our industry is absolutely dependent on trucking. We're also kind of getting mixed up in the GSA designations now in that, you know, when it first came out, they were talking about irrigators, and I'm one. I'm in our plan down there in San Luis Obispo County. But they started to go after the grazing lands and assess the fee on the grazing lands. And while they're not exactly non-extractors, they're de minimis extractors in trying to water their cattle. But those fees can go pretty high because obviously they're controlling a pretty big amount of acreage. So there was a lawsuit in Butte started up there over the Vina GSA, and at this point, our Cattlemen's Association, I believe, is going to step in and carry that lawsuit forward, trying to get adjudication on whether that's legal to just charge everybody, or should you only charge the extractors? How am I doing on time?
You're fine. One more minute.
So that's coming along. Quickly, I want to talk about species, which you probably knew I was going to talk about today, but let me start it off with elk. You know, the state government in all its wisdom transported elk into our country, and what started out as 5 cows, one died, and 1 bull. So we're at 4 cows and 1 bull are now well up over 200 running on 3 of the ranches there around me, including us. So while that is not near the problem that the wolf is in Northern California for our industry, but it's still at some point, we're going to have to reach an agreement on how this is going to work because there's no harvest plan that you can deal with big enough to hold them under control. The wolf is a different problem, and it has a federal designation as well as a state designation. And I love when the industry as a whole, the politicians as a whole talk about sustainability, right? So we had $3 million in the budget in 2021 to pay for depredation, pay for presence, and pay for flaggery, which flaggery is you might all know, but it's ribbons that hang on the fence that are supposed to shoo the wolf away. So that money ran out early this year, or February, maybe March this year. So we were hoping to do a $3 million annual budget out of it, but obviously budget considerations, that wasn't going to happen. In the end, they designated $600,000 to go to wolf depredation. Well, we have one family in Siskiyou County that's going to burn that 600 maybe I don't know how they do it up there. Officially, there is 40, maybe 46 wolves. I have it on here. I'll look it up if you want the exact numbers on the count of fish and wildlife. The fact of the matter is there's probably 100 wolves. There's 7 acknowledged packs. At 8 packs, acknowledged packs, then you can start to depredate. But I just have a feeling between you and I and the gatepost that Fish and Wildlife's not gonna ever let that 8th pack become public knowledge just because of what will happen. And trust me, as an organization, we'll be right there suing the day they designate the 8th one. We're going to go after this for all we can. And you know, I'm not even gonna say what it's like watching a wolf kill a calf. You know, it's just, you can't run that publicly. They just flip out, and it wouldn't help us. But I'm just telling you, I don't know how we get into these situations, but we have. How's my time?
You're up.
Quickly, the Cattle Council, which is housed here at CDFA. And, you know, as an industry, we voted on that. Dairy, beef, we voted and we agreed to give that dollar. And that has been incredibly successful. I know we face a lot of regulatory problems that I'm not even thinking about addressing. But we have 3 people out of the 5, I think, that actually get funding out of the Cattle Council are dedicated to either regulatory or, well, I guess you could consider the wolf problem, mostly regulatory. So, you know, it's been successful. We get a lot of guys my age that are in the industry that don't do computers. I'm not saying I'm that guy either, but I can run my computer. But, you know, it's just, they've been used to kind of living their life, and now the government's stepping on their toes. So that Cattle Council has been hugely successful, and I thank you guys for helping us with that. Done. 3 minutes over.
That's okay. We can take it off the other guy's time.
Oh, sorry.
I'm Jeff Bitter with Allied Grape Growers. Thank you for having me here today to try and squeeze in the state of the wine grape industry and wine industry in California in 10 minutes. So we're gonna run through these slides real quick. Just waiting for them to come up here. Okay. Next slide, please. So headlines in the industry. Okay, almost there. There we go. Those are some of the headlines we've seen this year in major newspapers and across the nation. But there's a lot of negative press about what's happening in the wine industry, as in a lot of ag in general in California is pretty tough right now. But we're seeing some specific challenges in the wine business that are largely due to a few different issues we'll go over today, but one of them is just the impact of the pandemic and what that did to the wine industry in terms of maybe leading us to believe that wine shipments were a little bit stronger than they were over a longer term period of time. Next slide. So today we're going to talk about the economic impact of the wine industry, sustainability, economics and policy, the changing American demographics, which are negatively affecting our industry, anti-alcohol and social moderation movement that's alive and well, imports and foreign competition, vineyard removals, and then we'll kind of tie all that up with a quick state of the industry summary. And I'm not going to cover necessarily pest and disease or smoke exposure. Those are huge industry issues for us. We've made great strides in those areas, but so I can say a lot of positive things during the Q&A if those are of topical interest to you. But probably won't talk about them too much today. Next slide. So overall, the economic impact of California wine is huge on both our state and nationally. You can see how many people and employees, what kind of economic impact it has in terms of billions of dollars that are generated through taxes and revenues and wages and all those things, and a lot of jobs created. Wine grapes, I believe, are probably the 3rd most planted permanent crop in California, behind nut crops. So a huge impact and huge implications for California. Next slide. We've been champions in terms of sustainability in our industry, and Secretary Ross can be directly given credit for that, as she was one of the initial folks involved in our industry in creating what we call the California Sustainable Wine Growing Alliance. And it is a partnership between growers and wineries. And so you can see the amount of acres and facilities that are certified sustainable through this voluntary program. And we have done a great job, I think, in leading the effort on sustainability for California agriculture. And our program is one that's looked at by other ag commodity groups pretty closely. Next slide. So no surprise here, but everybody's complaining, including us as consumers, inflation, interest rates, et cetera. The amount of overhead created by the costs involved with increasing inputs and labor over the years. You know, we've gone from $10 an hour to $16 just in a few short years. That's a huge amount of appreciation and cost. We have not seen commensurate price increases in commodity prices or grape value in this case. And so that's been a huge deal for us as an industry, particularly when you fold in the elimination of the ag overtime exemption. And so we're really struggling. I would say if there's any one issue besides water in some cases, but any one issue that's huge for us in our industry, it's the cost of labor. And then for most areas of the state, you know, average wine grape prices are no better than they were 20 years ago. And you can look in our own state data to see that is the truth when you compare our prices today versus, you know, early 2000s. Next slide. So this is just a couple of data points here regarding economics and policy. We have a problem right now where inventory is backed up at the distributor and warehouse level. Retailers, the consumers aren't buying as much wine, retailers are backed up, and wholesalers don't want to carry the inventory because it's costing them now about 16% of their operating profits versus 5 to 6% just a couple of years ago. And of course, that's due to higher interest rates because they finance the purchase of those wine until it ships out to the retailer. So it's causing a major backup, and everybody's going to just-in-time type of inventory modeling now. Next slide. So this is a quote out of a recent report that's shown there on the bottom right, this BMO wine market report. And it basically says, with the total market likely to remain flat or decline slightly and consumers at their limit for price increases, wineries need to take steps now to proactively, and I highlighted this part, protect their business in the coming year and foreseeable future. And the key word there to me is protect. What that tells me is that we're on the defense in this industry, that folks are making decisions that are very conservative in nature. Protection in this case means don't get overburdened with inventory. And so that's how wineries, distributors, retailers tend to protect themselves, as they don't invest too much in inventory. That all rolls down to the grower and the production level. And on the farm we saw last year, an estimated 400,000 tons of wine grapes that did not get harvested due to lack of market. We expect to see a significant amount of wine grapes again this year go unharvested because of lack of market. Next slide. Sorry for the kind of jumbled fonts there on top. They're over the top of each other. But this is an eye chart, but I'm going to explain it real quick. The little bumps you see all along the top there, that's the baby boomer generation moving through time. So this is showing you the amount of these deciles of folks over time. And what I'm pointing out here is that the baby boomer generation has been significant to the wine industry. That is who we have catered to and sold to for many years. That's how we've experienced success over the last 30 years in this business. And you can see that a lot of it is due to their sheer size. If you take the next two deciles that are what we would consider, you know, incoming consumers, the 35 to 44-year-olds and the 45 to 54 years old, those are the two smallest deciles of folks out there in the population today. So we just look at this from a sheer numbers perspective and say that's alarming. We're losing consumers from the standpoint that the population of our potential wine drinkers is shrinking. Next slide, please. This one shows, and this is kind of another demographic slide, the blue line along the top is your white, non-Hispanic percentage of the part of the population. That's flat. It's been flat for some number of years. Then along the bottom there, you see the various ethnic groups that are growing quite a bit in size, Hispanic being the most, but also Asian and Black populations. So this has huge implications for the wine industry as well, because we historically have not done a good job to marketing to those ethnic groups. And they also don't have a history within their own ethnic or groups or races of drinking wine as part of their culture and background, which is obviously different than your white non-Hispanic who is largely European-based. Next slide, please. And then this is just a real quick one question out of a major survey that's done every 2 years by the Wine Market Council. And they asked the question, reasons for drinking, why do you drink less wine now than you did a couple of years ago, for all the respondents that said that they were drinking less wine. The number one reason is I'm drinking less alcohol generally. So it wasn't targeted towards wine, but it was certainly a movement towards less alcohol. Next slide. And so what we're seeing now from the government is they're looking at the U.S. dietary guidelines will be rewritten next year, or reintroduced with new verbiage and updates. That's usually done every 5 years. We're looking at the guideline around alcohol changing, where right now it says that we can choose as adults in America to drink in moderation by limiting intake to 2 drinks a day for men or 1 for women. Next slide, please. What they're looking at potentially is guidelines that say no amount of alcohol is acceptable for a healthy lifestyle. Or if they follow the Canadian guidance, which was just released, no more than 2 drinks per week is acceptable alcohol consumption. So these types of guidelines have huge implications on our industry, particularly as you look at wine as part of culture and food, not so much as just, you're going out drinking large volumes of alcohol associated with wine. Next slide, please. And then imports and foreign competition, we're always up against that. There's been increased presence, or I should say increased awareness of imports as an issue now that we have our own overproduction problem here in California, where we've seen grapes hanging on the vine. So now it has really come to light, what is the volume of imported wine coming in, and it's substantial. And so we've seen some articles written lately on that. It is a problem that has existed for years, but the real issue here is it a level playing field for us as California growers? Are we, when we're up against foreign competition, are we on the same cost basis as them? Do they have the same regulation and things in their countries? What's their carbon footprint, when they're shipping wine across the globe in tankers and all that? So it's definitely a huge issue for our industry. Next slide, please. And all of this kind of leads to, and this is a little bit hard to see, but these are pictures of vineyards in dormancy in the wintertime with grapes hanging on the vine still. These are vineyards that do not get harvested. So we're seeing that all over the state. We saw it last year. Again, we assume that we're going to see that this year as well, based on the current market conditions. Next slide, please. So one of our challenges as an industry is in the vineyard removal area. We have kind of simultaneous with this excess capacity of vineyards that we have in the state now, we also have a prohibition on ag burning. And that prohibition is no surprise. It's been in the works for many, many years since Dean Flores introduced the law, and it got passed in the early 2000s to ban ag burning, but it's now finally coming to light. And the reality is that there's incentive programs out there to help growers dispose of their vineyards when they do remove them, with some assistance for the additional cost that it takes to actually remove a vineyard without burning it. And that requires a lot of hand labor. You're essentially dismantling the vineyard. So imagine when you build a vineyard and you develop a vineyard, you're putting in your stakes and wire and drip hose and all that, training vines. This does the exact opposite, and it all takes labor to do that, to dismantle the vineyard so that you can chip the wood, separate from the metal and the wire. There are some programs and some equipment now where some of that can be utilized and consumed together, but they're very, very expensive. These machines cost well over $1 million to purchase and operate. And so the specific issue here is where we had some funding from the state. That funding is running out. The San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District has subsidized this program from their general fund in recent months. They don't have enough money to get through the end of their budget year next June. And so we are all kind of wondering what happens when the money does officially run out. Next slide, please. So this brings us kind of to the summary here. The contributing factors to where we are in the business today are really kind of twofold. We have this inventory bubble, which I spoke about earlier, and that was really due to the pandemic. There was some false market signals, if you will, during that time where consumers were pantry loading, so there were some decisions made in the industry to increase production, if you will. There was actually some planting contracts done with growers to plant new and develop new vineyards, but that trend has shifted, and it shifted very quickly. From the middle of 22 on till now, we've seen a decrease in wine shipments to the tune of about 8% per year, which is significant. And so that's a short-term issue. The inventory bubble is a kind of a short-term issue. Once that passes, we will get back to some type of normal inventory movement. But longer term, we also have an oversupply of acres in the ground, and that's more of a structural problem for the long term. So there are kind of two factors we're dealing with here. Next slide, please. So this shows you what wine shipments have looked like over time. And you can see in 2017 to 2019, we really started to experience a flat market even before the pandemic. The pandemic gave us that false sense that I showed you there of increased demand, but it only lasted for a short period of time. And you've seen shipments now drop considerably since then. And what is the analysts project is that we're barely going to get back to that flat level of 2016 through 2019 by 2026. So we've dropped off precipitously in shipments, and we're just now kind of hoping to get back to where we were when we were flat before the pandemic. So this is all causing quite a bit of consternation in the industry with oversupply and points to why we have the problems we do today. Next slide, please. So our recommendation has been the removal of vineyards from our group. I've talked about that pretty vocally for some time. We're currently, we need to get down to about 520 to 540,000 bearing acres. We're not there. We need some additional removals to get us into that arena, but I suspect by 2026 we may get there. Unfortunately, the reason those removals are going to be happening is because growers are going to be going out of business. They're not going to be able to pay bills. They're not going to be able to sustainably farm their wine grape vineyards. And so that's going to be, that picture there is a picture of economic harm, quite honestly. Next slide. That's it. My time is up. So I definitely will be around here for questions afterwards.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here. I want to thank the State Ag Board members for coming in August to hear all of us talk about the industry. And Secretary Ross, thank you so much for all those years of dedicated service, putting up with all of us, complaining farmers, right? I do have just a couple of slides. I thought, I wasn't exactly sure what to talk about because there's so much. But I'm Jeff Vandenheuvel, and I actually was a dairy farmer in Chino in Southern California. Next slide. And I started on August 1, 1979, milking 120 cows. I was 19 years old, newly married. And so I thought I'd put a graph together of the industry over my career, which is 45 years now. I stopped milking cows in 2018. If any of you have been to the Inland Empire of Southern California, there's not near as many cows there as there used to be. It used to be the dairy capital of the world. Never should have allowed that many cows in that small of an area, but we did. And we paved it over. But if you look at 1979, when I started in the dairy business, there were less than 1 million cows in California. And we produced around 12 million pounds of, 12 billion pounds of milk a year. Now, that was about half the size of Wisconsin. Wisconsin was about 24 billion. So in 1979, we were half. And by 1993, we passed Wisconsin to be the nation's largest dairy state from a production standpoint. And we were looking around for, California to change their license plates, America's Dairyland. Somehow or another, just didn't happen. But yeah, so for 30 years, we've been the nation's largest milk producing state. And then we peaked in about 2008. And this is relevant. Let's go to the next slide, Josh. This is really the last 20 years. And I think there's quite a story here because the California population, cow population, which you saw go up like a rocket, then peaked and has begun to slowly decline in terms of the number of cows. On the production, you could see our production is maintaining, and this is through efficiencies and improvements in the productive capabilities of our cows. And what this doesn't show is that not only, this is just milk production, but the milk that we are producing has more butterfat and more protein in it now, the components in that milk. So we're actually able to produce a lot of milk with a smaller and smaller footprint in terms of the number of cows that we have in California. So the next slide is kind of the economics, and the top line there is the mailbox milk price, and USDA has a price series for a mailbox milk price, and there's a national and then there's a statewide. They keep a statewide that data, and it goes back much further than this. But this is just an indication of what a dairyman lives with. He has no control over these mailbox milk prices. But and we're talking about a margin on a dairy that. So on the left-hand side, you can see this is dollars per hundredweight. So in 2014, which was the best year of my career and probably the best year of any dairy farmer in America's career, 2009 was the worst year in any dairyman's in America's history, but 14. So we got to about $23 per hundredweight, but then we were down by 2017 to $13 a hundredweight. And the margin on a dairy year in, year out is in the dollar range, like $1. So you can see with this kind of volatility, the kind of difficulty that the industry has managing through all this. Now, the bottom line is feed costs. In 2019, USDA's safety net went to historically, they'd had a price support program, which was back in 1979, and that's part of the history of how California got to be the nation's largest dairy state. And if you're interested in it, I'd be happy to tell you it's actually a fascinating story. But the way that the dairy industry, the safety net program for dairy operates today is this margin between the blue line, and they use an all milk price, but frankly, California, they use an all milk price, but California's mailbox price now and the U.S. mailbox price are within pennies. We are basically in the middle of the range now in California. And this feed is a national feed indicator, but it's very similar because, there's a certain basis, but cows need fiber, hay, and silages, and they need protein from the soybeans and alfalfa, and they need energy from corn. So these are basic feed commodities of what makes up a cow's diet, and USDA has an index. Now, when you see those two lines close to each other in real time, you are seeing very compressed margins and negative returns. So you can see now, this finishes out in 04, we are starting to get profitable, but where they came together in '23 was a very, very difficult period. So I had a conversation with a friend of mine recently who's a credit manager for a feed company here in California. And just to give you anecdotally kind of where it's at, I said, well, how the guys doing? And he said, well, they're in the black right now. For the most part, they're cash flowing, but they got a big hole to dig out of. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, a year and a half ago, he said, I had 15 customers that were at 120 days behind to paying their bill. He said, now I got 40. Okay, so there's been significant deterioration of the financial health of everybody, but then there are certain folks that are a much more difficult place to handle it. Now, the reality of what's going on in the dairy industry, and it's so great to listen to my cattleman friend talk about how great cattle prices are, and they are, and that really benefits dairy. And, like in my condition, I sold my cows in 2018. I was 58 years old at that time. I didn't have any kids that wanted to be dairymen. I had to make a big move. And so, I didn't have a next generation to worry about. I had other things that I could do. And so that's what I did. I went to go work for the dairy industry. That generation that's in my range, 50, 60, 70 years old, with these kind of cattle prices, and what we're facing, we're seeing a lot of generating. They're not broke, but they're just making a career decision that it's been a great run, and it's time to turn it over. This is unfortunate in some respects because the big are getting bigger, and the small are the ones that are under the most pressure. So on price regulation, the dairy industry is very price regulated. Milk is very perishable, and so the government, whether it's the state, in the case of when we had a state order, or the federal government, been involved in milk price regulation. We just had a major hearing in the federal order system. They had not had a hearing for 16 years, so a lot of we're pricing based on a formula. It's all driven by market prices, but then how those market prices get converted into milk prices is through formulas that had not been updated. So USDA conducted I think it was about 45 days of hearings, and they just came out with a recommended decision on the 1st of July, and it is going to adjust these milk prices and give more margin to the plants. Obviously, it's hard to deny that the plants have had higher costs over the last 16 years with energy and labor particularly, and that'll get implemented sometime in the first quarter probably of 2025, and there'll be an adjustment in milk prices. One of the things is that now that we're in a federal order, the same rules that apply in Wisconsin and Kansas and Texas apply here. So there's no, our relative position probably doesn't change much. There'll be an adjustment in the pricing system, and the markets will adjust, and we'll all move on. Just to wrap this up, I haven't really talked about water quality, air quality, water supply. There's just a myriad of things that we have to manage. The dairy industry, I was talking to Don a little bit about it at lunch. The one thing about a dairy is, we're just really stationary targets. There's no doubt we impact the environment. We have, I will say to the credit, while we have lots of disagreements about milk pricing and all the rest, and poor Secretary Ross has been in the middle of so many of those. When it comes to managing and being good stewards, the industry has really pulled together and invested in science and in doing the right thing. And then we've had great partners at CDFA and USDA and other places that have helped us to do the kind of things that we need to be sustainable and to reduce our impact. But going back to that first slide, I think the public needs to understand we're doing more with less, and we're very, very committed to being good stewards of the environment. And so with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
All right. At this time, we'll go ahead and open it up to the board for any questions you may have for any of the young lady and gentleman. No, really great presentations, and amazing to see the many issues we have here in California facing all the different industries, except the cattle guys. They're doing pretty good.
Cattle and prunes, come on.
Yeah, cattle and prunes, there you go. Hey, I've got a question for you, Jeff. On the dairy side, what's this heat done to your, to the production throughout the state? What are you seeing in this year?
Yeah, I mean, it's been quite a heat wave that we've had from the end of June all the way through July. From what I'm seeing anecdotally, it actually, the dairies that have invested in cow cooling, you know, with misters and good shades, we're getting enough cooling at night that the cows are hanging in there.
Okay.
And it's actually remarkable how well, I mean, they always go down in July, right? I mean, it's just the natural cycle of milk production. But the guys with, you know, typically the older facilities that haven't been invested in, you know, that impact is much greater. So, you know, overall, we're in a very good balance, supply demand wise on milk. We don't have too much and we don't have too little. And so at the moment, which is why we're finally kind of getting into the profitable range. But the heat, I've been amazed talking to my friends that their cows are producing as well as they are, considering the heat that we've had.
Good to hear. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
So I have a question that doesn't make it fair, but I was asked it on camera and had to recover very quickly. First of all, you all gave really great presentations, and thank you for being here. I was struck by what I know to be true across everyone you're talking about, and that is the care for the land, the care for the workers, just trying to survive right now. And I know from the great work of cattlemen and the California Rangeland Trust, the commitment to that land and making sure future generations might have access to it. Wine grapes, you've already mentioned the sustainability program. I know for a fact that California dairy families are leading on sustainability. That doesn't necessarily get monetized. So for all of you, I'm going to ask each one of you to try to answer this one. What is it that you would like your California consumers, who are also the voters who drive a lot of public policy, as well as their buying habits, what would you like for them to know about your sector in agriculture?
I was waiting to hear from Catherine. Well, you know, I remember long ago this whole idea of social license, right? And I think the dairy industry, because we've been so visible and you know, we've really had to take that to heart. We understand that you know, the politics demands that we be good stewards, and we've invested very serious resources in doing that. We get a little frustrated, frankly, because we think we're, you know, when you look at the amount of greenhouse gases that have been captured through the digester program, why we're taking criticism for that when it's, you know, if you took that out of the mix, I mean, we're a big part of California reaching its climate goals. And we're frankly baffled by those that, you know, come after us. We employ a lot of people, and these are great jobs. They're 365-day-a-year jobs. These, you know, they stay with us for years. You know, the kids have gone to college, they get married, and you know, the dairy industry, and you know, what's our evidence? The rest of the country's trying to recruit our dairymen, right? Because of the economic engine that a dairy provides when you add it to the other agriculture things that are going on. I mean, a cow is an amazing animal, right? I mean, it can turn almond hulls, which used to be a a disposal problem or cotton seed, back when we had a lot of cotton, into milk and meat that are very nutritious and good. And so, yeah, we're the ultimate upcyclers, and the generation, Secretary Ross, you get a chance to interact with this, the younger folks than me, but I'm continue to, be amazed at how dedicated they are to, really being good stewards. So, yeah, it's a great story. Obviously we should tell it better, but that's what we'd want to know. We'd want the public to know.
Well, in the wine industry, wine's just sexy, right? I mean, it's a fun industry to work in. The reality is that we contribute to, quite honestly, to the aesthetics of California. I mean, who doesn't like the picturesque view of a rolling hills vineyard? We're year-round crop in terms of providing jobs and labor in the vineyard. Even in the dormant season, there's plenty to do in a vineyard. And what we find with our vineyard workers is that they're year-round full-time employees. They're career people in these vineyards. They're not pass-through employees, and so we really contribute to the economic base of California. And it's like all ag in California. It's vitally important for our consumers to really pay attention to what they're buying on the shelf, and make sure that does say California on it, that it's not something other than California, because we all of us up here have to compete with foreign competition in our products. So that's basically what I think consumers really need to kind of take ownership, if you will, with regard to what is it they're buying, putting in their mouth, what are the regulatory standards that those producers have to comply with to get that to the shelf in our country or in our state versus other competing areas of the world. And so it's really important for us to educate. I think it kind of falls back onto our own industry. We have to educate the consumer, about those things they need to be looking for and what they need to pay attention to, so that they are buying what they genuinely want to buy and consume.
I think that most of this group's probably read Dave Daly's article when he lost the 300 cows. And generally, ranching families feel the same way as Dave did, and we would have all been devastated. The economic part of it didn't even come into the equation in his description, which, if you haven't had a chance to read it, I'd encourage everybody to read it. Was really well done. But the science, the GHG, I mean, we're frustrated a lot, like Jeff was saying, that a lot of the figures that are coming out are not California figures, they're worldwide figures that are being used against us, so that the science isn't exactly fair. But there's a lot of carbon sequestration that cattle are providing by consuming, carbon. I'm not going to go into the methane, the other end of that problem unless you want to, but there's the fire reduction, the fuel reduction has to play a factor in there. I mean, I don't know, I was talking to my dad the other day and he just says, we had our share of fires. And yeah, he is still alive. I wasn't communicating with him. But, for some reason now you can't get them out. Why? Well, I don't understand why we can't get them out. And I'm saying, well, given our tools, but that is neither here nor there. But the size of these fires now, and we can't stop them. Grazing is starting to become fashionable again in California. Albeit, the goats are probably just ahead of cattle in sexiness. But, that's part of it. And just in general, I just think that there should be more credit given for what greenhouse gases we do take or are able to control.
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's difficult because I shy away a little bit from putting all of our emphasis on the consumers, because the easy answer would be, well, they can pay more because the margins are so slim. And I think instead I want to push us to look at the structural pieces that are creating the food system as we know it, since it feels highly inequitable for me to have that be the solution, is that everyone can pay more, because for so many Californians, it's not feasible to pay more. Of course, I want people to know truly how slim the margins are for most small-scale growers, and that often these systems require a degree of self-exploitation, because the farmers who are making ends meet are working way more than 40 hours, like, you know, not having a lot of the luxuries that other people do have. And that to produce food in a sustainable way that is good for the people who are working the land, for the soil, for the watersheds, can be really expensive and difficult. So I think it's both people being aware of that and really focusing on the structural issues, so that we're not expecting consumers to be the ones sort of bridging that gap.
Okay, do we have any other questions, comments for our presenters?
Very good.
You want to check online?
Hi, if you would like to make public comment on this agenda item, please raise your hand and I'll unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment this time.
If you'd like to make a public comment, you want to come up to the podium? And as you know, 3 minutes.
Disneyland, Indiana Jones with my grandkids.
That'll do it.
Karen, I'm hearing good smiles today. I'd like to comment on this, that everybody should understand that I think every American should be an environmentalist. I hate it when we categorize people as you're environmentalists, you're some hippie from Oregon, you know. I was in Chino for a lot of years. We used to be able to drink out of our wells. You can't drink out of them anymore. The nitrates are just incredibly high. My family comes from Oklahoma. We overgrazed the ground. It turned into dirt in a dust bowl. So I just think water is a limited resource, and land and air and all things that we have to all consider. But I also agree that we get some bad examples, like sometimes they sat there and talked about the cows, you know, creating all this methane gas. Well, I always challenged anyone who said that, come spend the night in my garage with 4 cows, or you can go over to this guy's house and spend the night in the garage with his car running all night. I know which garage I'm going to, where the cows are at. So some common sense needs to come into play and certain things like that, but I think all of our leaders have demonstrated, Jeff being one of them, I don't know the other people here, but I do know Jeff. Your takes on all that stuff, but sustainability is very, very important. We have to leave it better for our generations when we leave. It's a very simple concept, and leave it as better than what we found it.
Thank you. Any other comments? Nope. All right. Thank you, panel. You guys have all been great, and I appreciate the time you spent to come up and talk with us today. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, we're going to have our final panel today. We have Shannon Douglas with the California Farm Bureau, and we have Neil Callis, Western Growers, Turlock Fruit Company. Shannon was elected as president of the California Farm Bureau in December of 2023. She is the owner of Douglas Ranch, a diversified farming operation in Orland. And Shannon has served in many leadership positions with the Farm Bureau, including director of the Glenn County Farm Bureau, chair of the California Farm Bureau Young Farmers and Ranchers State Committee, and 3 terms as vice president of the organization. Neil Callis is a member of the board of directors for Western Growers and currently serves as the board's treasurer. Neil is also part of the management team for Turlock Fruit Company, a family-owned and operated fresh produce grower, shipper, packer, founded in 1918. So welcome to both of you. Good to see you. Which one of you is going to go first here? Shannon?
Well, great. Well, thank you guys so much for inviting us all here. I think there'll be a lot of common threads from us as kind of the state of things right now. I have some comments that I was supposed to read and then comments that I'll probably actually say, right? Hence not having a presentation for you, Josh. I think when we talk about the state of things for California farmers right now, it's pretty challenging. And we heard just a bit ago, and of course our friends in Darien talking about the collections piece. I can tell you that I live in Glenn County. The next county north of me is Tehama. And in Tehama County, we've got some real big challenges from some nut processors right now who are in a really tough financial position. And I talked to someone just last week, actually at an unrelated meeting, but about the crisis it's frankly created for their economic development and workforce alliance people in Tehama County, because we're talking about over 300 people being laid off. And for small communities, that's extremely significant. And obviously for that to have happened, there's certainly other factors, right? And so we know that for many of our neighbors, there are some pretty major challenges right now in getting bills paid and getting maybe payments to you, depending on the kind of work that you do. And that just makes for just a real tough climate for us overall. A different use of that climate term, right? But our economic climate is pretty challenging. I am very lucky to be the new president of California Farm Bureau, and so while I'm going to talk about the tough things, I also am going to highlight some where I think there's some bright spots, so I hope to include that at the end. I don't see a clock on our timer, so bear with me. Josh will probably start giving me the look if I need to hurry up, right? But these economic challenges right now, I think, are so important to highlight because while most of it is tied to the commodity prices, and as we all know, as farmers, we are price takers and unfortunately not makers in maybe a few instances. And so while, much like Steve, I'm glad for cattle prices now because on our diversified farm, that is helping things. Who would have guessed, though, right? I told the last group I talked to when my son was probably 7, he was not happy that we were developing a walnut orchard, and he really instead wanted a dairy to be put right there. And who would have thought 7 years or 8 years, I guess now later, that actually might have penciled a little bit better than those walnuts are at the moment. And especially if we just, I guess, left that pasture, right? But those challenges become really important because when we talk about why we're losing farms in California, that's going to be a piece of it. But we've been looking at some economic data and some of the census data at California Farm Bureau with our friends, some economic friends at American Farm Bureau in the last few months. Really looking, frankly, we've been looking at the value that we provide to the member and the work that we're doing. But with that, we've also been able to find some other important indicators, and certainly you guys well know, but when we're talking about losing 10+% of our farmers in a very short window, that's significant, and that was before the commodity prices are what they are now. If we do a quicker snapshot, we're gonna find fewer. And I believe in the amazing work that we do in California and the great crops that we grow. And we don't probably have a ton of out-of-state friends here, so I wouldn't have to worry about offending anyone with the best quality of about everything, arguably, that we grow, right? And we want to be able to keep doing that in this state, but the economics of it are certainly very challenging. And, frankly, we're dealing with an increased regulatory burden all the time. Just yesterday, actually, was the last day I could try to reach my county with some misclassifications I'm dealing with SGMA, where they've put us in the wrong bucket, and trying to navigate that to make sure I don't have to pay the higher fees because we've already got enough increased costs this year. And about 2 weeks ago, I just shared with another group a story of a fellow farmer who I happened to run into at a swim meet, right? So in a very casual, place as we're trying to be moms, and in her case, a grandma. And she was telling me her frustration with her food safety requirements right now with her walnuts. And she, whoever unfortunately had to deal with her complaints, I suppose, on the phone, but was being told, why don't you have your kids do this if this is so hard for you to do? And she said, well, this is why my kids don't want anything to do with the farm. And that call ended, according to her, with her telling them, I am 72 years old. I'm not dealing with this. Arrest me if you have to, but I'm done with this. And I think that's important to share because that is a common sentiment that people are feeling, just this level of frustration. And when you pile that on with the economic crisis, really, maybe disaster in some cases, and then we think about, my son is a 13-year-old. He's in high school here shortly. And I worry about, people have talked about this overlap between the 80s and similarities. I also want to make sure that now my son doesn't start thinking, well, gosh, I better look at those other options and I better find something else to do. So I try as best as I can to keep the language better at home regarding the future opportunities because we want to encourage that next generation to come back. But these challenges are pretty tremendous that we're facing. I think it's hard to deny the regulatory costs that we're seeing, and as I've tried to share with people, I think from our perspective, we're very small farmers. I'm a first-generation farmer. I should have shared that. I'm not a farmer's daughter by any means or any sense. My dad could barely garden, but I want to make sure that we have this opportunity for the next generation, and I worry that the environment that we have for them is going to be just too discouraging. There are ways for our larger farms to survive, of course, and there's ways, to be clear, for smaller farms, but the challenge that we have are really pushing that dynamic of consolidation because, I would love that instead of me dealing with SGMA paperwork and irrigated lands paperwork and my husband dealing with the pesticide paperwork and our food safety and the paperwork. That's definitely not why we became farmers, right? I actually like soil and tractors and animals, and I don't like the paper nearly as much. But that's a real burden. And it's not just to, the lovely 72-year-old farmer, it is to the 20-something and 30-something and 40-something farmers. And, hopefully they're going to redo that study that Cal Poly did about those regulatory costs. But, when we're talking about a 10-year time frame and a nearly 800% increase in those costs, we then can't be surprised that the same farmers that we lost are the small, some mid-sized, but particularly small farmers, and frankly, are socially disadvantaged farmers. And those are the people that I think we want to make sure we have in this space. I want room for everybody in their sizes and opportunities because we all bring something different to the table. So I think the summation of my comments are, we have really big challenges right now. They continue to grow. Challenges are a little bit easier to deal with when at least our pricing's good, but when pricing's not good, those problems feel even bigger. So I think I can probably stop there and share the microphone because I bet we have pretty similar thoughts on this.
No, I think so. Thanks for the invitation to come here and chat, both as a grower in the Central Valley, as a member of also as a member of the Western Growers Board of Directors and Treasurer. So I have, I'm part of the family management team, but I'm also the in-law or the outlaw, if you will, depending on what day it is. And I have the joy and misfortune of working with 3 generations of my wife's family. My brother-in-law, who's a millennial, all the way up to my grandfather-in-law, who was a traditional. So we have a firsthand perspective on California ag that goes back to the 1950s. And so in terms of the state of the industry and the state of farms, I would say it could be summed up in one word, and that's anxious. We are all very anxious. And anxious both in a tactical sense, what is next season going to be like, given that not a lot of crops are making money right now. And we're talking specialty crops. That's the area I'm representing. But there's also anxiousness around the next generation. So I also have a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old to go with him. And, that's really the play at this point in coming up on my 50s is, can we keep this thing going for another generation? And even if we can keep it going, why in the world would they want to go in it when they hear Dad come home and talk about the challenges we have? So before I go all the way down that rabbit hole, I do want to share a piece of thanks and good news. I think not just on behalf of farmers, but also I think business owners all across the state. And that was a big thank you to the legislature and the governor for signing the PAGA reform. That was a big deal. I don't know what the intent of the law was when it was passed. I wasn't in the room then, but it had, I think, a deleterious and ruinous effect on businesses everywhere. So happy to see that, mostly bipartisan fix there. So that's the good news I have. But to go right back into the anxiousness piece of it, there aren't a lot of crops that are making money right now. We're primarily a vertically integrated melon shipper, but we also grow asparagus. We're one of the last 3 asparagus growers in the state of California. I will come back to that. What's the reason for the price pressure? Minimum wage has increased 60% in the 12 years I've been in the industry. And if I look ahead to the next 10 years, if they're going to be like the last 10 years, we're going to have a lot of consolidation in the industry. We're going to have a lot of smaller farms that will not be able to make it. And you'll have a lot of medium-sized farms, 3,000 acres and up, that are going to look at it and go, you know, that private equity buyout looks like it makes sense. Let somebody else deal with the headache. And I see that. That's a tremendous concern. It's a shared concern among farmers everywhere, not just for our own operation, but just for the health of the industry in general. So, you know, coming back to the other half of that equation too, it's not just, the concern is not just for keeping established businesses moving from one generation to the next. It's about the loss and lack of opportunity for young, motivated farmers to start their own operation. So we farm down in Fireball. I flew up there to be at this meeting. I mean, it's hot as all get out down there. And what else could you be doing except, you know, stomping around the dirt in 105-degree heat, chasing melons? It's a lot of fun if you can make it pay. But if you're a young farmer and you wanted to go set up a 700-acre deal in the Pinochi Water District, which is one of the areas where we farm, that's a $4 million buy to get that ground. Who in the world in their 20s is going to come up with that kind of capital to get started? And who in the world is going to borrow that kind of money? So you really, I think the door is almost shut from where I sit right now. The door is almost shut on smaller farms doing what you've done, trying to establish a business and just go build something. So, you know, with that having been said, I want to use asparagus as not a cautionary tale, but an exemplary story, right? It's a perfect example. When we talk about what the last years have been like in terms of wage increases and wage pressure, upward wage pressure, and again, what the next 10 years might look like. In 1979, there were 40,000 acres of asparagus in California. Today, there's less than 700, and 400 of it run through my packing shed each spring. That's all that's left. The LA Times came and did a story on us earlier this year because one of their food writers said, and her husband's from Los Banos, so she came with a viewpoint of like, where did it all go? And she wrote this great story about it, but I can put it in 2 minutes or less. It's wages in competition from Mexico. Our workers make in a day what our competition's workers make in a week. And the retailers are buying from us all. So the California grown and the buy local movement is admirable, it's great. And a speaker from the last panel made the point, I think Catherine made the point, that you can't ask consumers just to pay more just to support California ag. But in fact, that is what we're asking. You have the choice and make the choice if you can. Not everybody can. But from a wholesaler's point of view, we sat down 2 years ago with a California-based retailer, and they're all excited to, let's do an asparagus promotion. We want to do California grown. This is really exciting. When the dust settled, they'd taken about 20% of our crop that year. And when I ran the numbers, our net profit on that 20% of our crop was about $10,000. And I'm like, how did that happen? And anytime you set up these contract deals, it's a little bit of a loss leader. You're trying to get some movement going to give yourself an opportunity to take advantage of a spot market potentially. But in this case, okay, our mistake. So we went back to the same retailer a year later and I sat down and said, really our break even's very close to $2 per 1 pound bunch. Because you've got the growing, the water cost, which is never going to get less. You've got the escalating labor costs. We have for 400 acres of asparagus between 2 different farmers. You have 175 people in the field for each farmer and 180 people in the packing shed. And that's for 400 acres of a combined maybe, say, 10,000 between those 2 farming operations. So it's a lot of work for not a lot of return. So anyway, we sit there, I just walk the retailer through all this, And I said, we're our break even. It's kind of over here, we'd like to have you consider maybe a little less volume from us at maybe a slightly higher price. And the buyer said, nope, my VP wants to retail the heck out of asparagus at $1.79 a pound because they can get it for that out of Mexico. And that's it. And of course, the punchline of the entire story is you can go in that, we went to one of the stores in Los Banos and there was Mexican asparagus under a buy local banner. You know, so that, again, that's not all retailers, and mistakes were made, and that's fine, you know, but that is concerning about the future. And the point is, that's why there's only 700 acres left. So again, I got a call from 2 different members of the Western Growers community. Neil, what is this Prop 32, this $18 an hour? It's been qualified as a ballot initiative. What in the world is that about? And the part of me that's a poli-sci major was like, no, wait. There's a complicated political rationale for this, and it probably won't. But then you're like, no, it's pressure to continue to raise the minimum wage. If the next 10 years are like the last 10 years, again, this industry is going to see continued consolidation. And it's not going to be, you know, in a perfect world, because I'm a capitalist through and through. Somebody says, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to farm anymore. It's too expensive. Margin's too slim. Give someone else a chance. You're not going to get that young guy out of college who's going to go set up a 700-acre ranch. That ranch is going to get consolidated into a private equity buyout or some other larger operator that wants to consolidate and grow their area of operations because they're large and they have economies of scale. And I think that consolidation's not good for the consumer, and it's not good for the industry. I think the health of the industry really depends upon a mix of small, medium, and large farms all across the state. So I think that covers most of the points I wanted to touch on. One more, which was the infrastructure costs, again related to inflation. So I serve on the board of the Pinocchio Water District, and we consider participating in the BF Sisk dam raise. It's the most like slam dunk obvious water project you could possibly imagine. You're raising the dam to give 135,000 additional acre feet of storage, an additional 135,000 acre feet of storage in the valley. You've got Santa Clara as a partner already. This infrastructure supports everybody up and down that part of the valley, all the way down to Southern California. We voted not to participate because the water cost, the cost for having the storage, the opportunity to store water there was going to drive the water cost beyond our typical supplemental water cost in a dry year. So in order for Pinocchio Water District to guarantee that we can supply water to ratepayers in a dry year, we have multi-year agreements to buy water on the outside. So in wet years, it's expensive and it costs us money. In dry years, you don't have another choice. But we had to throw our hands up in the air and go, we can't participate. And that's troubling. The spiraling cost of that sort of infrastructure is driving farmers out of the equation. Now we're just going to have to buy the water on the open market from Santa Clara or whoever else. Good that it will be built. That's all generally positive, but troubling that as ratepayers, farmers can't participate, the water districts can't participate in that what should just be a slam dunk project. So I think that I'm sorry, that really did go down a negative rabbit hole, but I wanted to share kind of the point of view, especially crop growers up and down the state, and you know, our brothers and sisters in Imperial and Salinas as well. So that's it.
Thank you both. Really moving, really. So Neil, where do you see the company down the road? You've seen a lot of the companies in California go down the southern hemisphere and get into crop production and, you know, bring them back into the U.S. Do you see that as a possibility? What do you think will happen long term?
Well, for us, though, that's probably an eventuality within the next decade. You know, and I think that is, we had an outside Mexico deal at one point, but that was when it was a diversification, not a necessary part of our program. And so that's really what it looks like down the road, is it will be a necessary part of, it doesn't have to be year round, but we will no longer be able to survive on just a 3.5-month summer melon deal.
Do we have questions from the board? Secretary?
I just have to ask the question because there have been some very high-profile private equity failures. But we all know that California agriculture is capital intensive and has always needed outside capital, whether it was pension funds, insurance companies, and increasingly in and out private equity. Where do you see private equity wanting to stay in agriculture?
I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all question to that.
Okay.
I mean, I will say, I know that there are private equity firms that have the stomach for the ups and downs and will be engaged. But I think a good example, and this is parallel to private equity, venture capital for ag tech has come to a screeching halt. And that, you know, I've been involved in supporting that for 7 or 8 years now, and yeah, it's just stopped. And so it's because there's no longer an opportunity for a return on their investment, and they're working in tranches and stages because they've got this arc of payback they have to have, and ag tech's one piece of it.
Yeah.
So with regard to farming, yeah, there are PE firms out there that clearly have the stomach for it and the horsepower to make it happen. I think anybody that's trying to be in and out in less than 7 years, not a good fit. Not a good fit.
Yeah, we've seen the failures down our way with the private equity firms in for a short period and then they're gone. And maybe part of them maybe didn't do the homework that was necessary. But Shannon, what do you see as a solution for, how do we keep small and medium growers engaged and continuing to be, we'd like them all to be profitable or at least have the opportunity to be profitable.
Yeah, well, we certainly aren't going to keep them long if they don't have the opportunity to be profitable, right? I guess then they could, there was, Steve earlier said goats were sexy. I don't know if I misquoted him, but I was like, maybe they could be hobbyists, right? They could have hobby goats or something. I know mine are a hobby. So maybe with those things, they could stay as hobby and we'd still be glad to have them in the fold. But we do need to make sure they have the ability to turn a profit or they can't sustain their families. We definitely know that so many of our farm families have outside income and that's very important, but we then have to be realistic that we're subsidizing, arguably, your family's choosing to make that subsidization, support that, right, within your family. But I think we have to really recognize the barriers. And for so long, there's been my personal frustration has been this talk of our aging farmers, and that's the issue, that they're going to retire. And so our solution is that we just need to teach people how to farm. And never in my experience have I found that people are not able to get into farming because they don't know how to farm. I think there's an abundance of that knowledge, frankly. That's why there's so many, I think when you're hiring an agronomist, there's not a ton, but there are people who are certainly educated in that and even advanced degrees. Right? People are well educated.
And who love it and wouldn't do anything else.
Oh, absolutely, and that's why people do it without making money, right? Because they love it so much. Hence, especially if they can be an actual farmer, not a regulatory paperwork farmer, like it sometimes feels like some of us are. That certainly keeps them going. But I think we have to recognize the atmosphere that we're trying for them in this climate, right, that they're trying to do business in. Is really challenging for a small person. When you think about the economies of scale question that we just talked about, absolutely, there's always going to be economies of scale to someone who's larger. But when you think of, in some ways, the mental burden that some of these things are, hence my story earlier about, a 72-year-old who's telling them just arrest me, right? They're just tired of it. That's where we're at because, hopefully you can find a new compliance specialist, right? If that one throws up their hands and leaves. But my compliance specialist's only 13. Really, it's me right now, so it's not 13. But I've got a few years before I can be like, this is your problem, because certainly we know a lot of farm families have done that to the next generation. So, part of what I hope is really evaluating what these are. Are there still ways to streamline the system? It's very excessive. It's very challenging right now. If we can get commodity prices back up, it's things that we can work with. But I don't see a great solution to it. I know we need to find one. I wish I had one. But I think we really have to figure out a way to make it easier for people to do this work. They don't need training in how to do this work. It just needs to be not as cumbersome, not as expensive, and not as challenging, paperwork-wise.
Joy had her hand up.
Joy.
Neil, you said that people were pulling back from ag tech investment. Can you, I am just stunned to hear that.
Well, so I can, yes, I was surprised to hear that too. I'm not a venture capitalist, I'm from the outside looking in. But in my understanding of finance and how that part of the world works, they're looking at a long-term play and an exit. And you said maybe you're investing in 15 different companies, all maybe doing similar things in terms of automation or something else. And one of them is going to be the thing that the valuation allows an exit that makes the venture capital company a lot of money. When they say they've pulled back, they've plumbed all the options, it appears. And so they're just going to hang back and see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years. I'll give you a good example. When we first kicked this off in 2000, 17 or 18 at Western Growers. I flew down to Irvine, and Dennis Donahue, who's former mayor of Salinas, who's done a lot of work gathering people for these meetings. He had VCs in the room, he had Yamaha, he had Bosch, he had farmers, and he got all these people, and guys like me that are like, let's try and solve this. Like, let's break through the platitudes and really talk about the economics of this. In terms of what for melons is going to be the showstopper for us is when we can't hire people to cut the melons and lift them off the ground, put them in a trailer, or put them on a packing table. So in a very broad sense, that problem currently costs a couple of dollars a carton, and you have how many cartons of melons harvested in California? Less than 200 million, I think. So as I was talking through that set of economics, and all the VCs in the room, I was in the back of the room because I'd shown up late, and all the VCs in the room all just stopped listening and turned away because they did the math like that. It's a $2 a box problem times 200 million cartons. That's nothing. So it drives right into the point of, well, why is it a problem? Well, a farmer can't turn around and buy a piece of automation that makes it a $4 a carton problem. That's a misunderstanding around the industry, around the non-ag part of the world too, is that why don't you just buy a robot to do it? Well, I need 20 of them, and they're $250,000 a piece. So that's, at some point there will be, I still believe there will be an intersection of technology that is affordable and does replace the problem. But where we are today, it appears the ag tech investment has just hit the brakes for a while.
And I think it was really fascinating. I think it was at the Biological Summit to hear where venture capital is willing to put its money, because it's not about low and slow returns like a lot of ag is, but it's also they don't want to be just funding the great new idea unless they see high reward because it's high risk. And it's this getting it to commercialization, the proof of concept is there, but who is willing to fund that piece of it for how long it will take to make it truly commercially available? I mean, it's so complicated when we start getting into this. It's a great education for those of us who don't have money to put into it.
So, for example, what's happening therefore with, say, autonomous tractors? Is that just, I mean, I would think that would be just so universally needed.
So they've been around for a long time for Midwest scale agriculture. It's the small, more orchard, vineyard, and there's two very successful companies that I know of, and I guess I will use the term very successful loosely on that. And they position themselves to be acquired by some of the big brand names, so I think we'll see that continue. But in the meantime, we still have to get our regulatory house in order to be able to do it operationally.
So there's just this giant gap between getting the technology useful.
The technology's there,
Yes,
the
but-
data is being provided. It's a political gap at the board to ensure, and I will say, it is only fair to make sure that the workers feel safe about this, and if they're not brought in early in the discussion and handed something that says, oh, this is safe, don't worry about it, that's been a little bit backwards. I'm just being very honest from, have we looked at the beginning of the process, who needs to be at the table that also has influence on what a regulator's gonna be willing to take a risk on?
And I think what currently, don't you have to essentially isolate the field that will be using an autonomous piece of equipment and post it and not allow really anyone to get into that region where the autonomous tractor will be working? So, yeah, I went up and looked last week.
Well, there's another aspect too, and I think this is again where I think the VC approach into ag tech is, just taking a pause. If you think about the Uber that I took from the airport to get here, right? That started as a rule-breaking innovation. They gave their finger to the taxi cab medallions and said, we're just gonna do it. And guess what? People flocked to it, used the app. And the popularity and the uptake of the use of that service, I think, what it looks like, overwhelmed the state's regulatory ability to say no. And that's not gonna happen with autonomous tractors. There aren't enough tractors. So you've got OSHA out there. No, you can't, no, you gotta have all the safeguards and guardrails in place, and all valid, not a problem, but it's that scale problem, again, from the VC point of view. And I'll go back to my earlier comment. Our showstopper is getting product off the ground into a container. Tractors, people still want to drive tractors, for better or for worse.
All right. You have a quick one?
Yeah, quick one,
All right.
one, if it's okay. So you had so many very interesting things to say. Thank you so much for your comments today. One of the things that just keeps kind of rattling around in my head is this notion around buying local and, you know, having things coming right over the border and having no value, not enough value in the buy local brand. And I do wonder what your thoughts are on, I know I've seen kind of food miles as a marketing strategy, and I wonder what you think about that, especially in the era of climate change where younger markets are really interested in that. What are your thoughts about that kind of maybe co-located strategy with buy local?
I'm a fan of the food miles concept, and my father-in-law, Steve Smith, if he was listening, would be jumping up and down with joy, because he's always talking to our wholesale buyers about food miles. And we've talked about it in asparagus, and you know what we get? Yeah. That's the reaction. Well, yeah. You know that, and so there's a gap between, say, my enthusiasm and Steve's enthusiasm and your enthusiasm for food miles, and I think it's a valid metric. But in order to get the consumer informed about it, it's not something we can push through. It's something that the wholesalers and the retailers have to care about and want to push through. And the reality is, you know, I think about a different chain that might buy local, might source product locally, retail, or what am I trying to say? Market locally grown product. The product's going to go from our cooler to a distribution center and then somewhere else. And so the food miles thing starts to get a little complicated when you know, if you're being honest about it, because the retailers are like airlines, they've got a hub and spoke system. But no, I mean, I'm all for raising consumer and voter awareness of that issue, absolutely. What's the carbon footprint of your asparagus from Peru? What's the carbon footprint of your asparagus from anywhere else?
Yeah, I mean, I have to just believe that a carbon footprint from asparagus from Peru is going to be much higher than one that went to the hub and spoke model in California. Yeah, it feels like there's an opportunity there in terms of the messaging that even CDFA does around climate and ag, and kind of putting that together with buy local.
No,
I think
great-
I wanted
great-
to add, if you don't mind, I was going to add that as someone, I did farmers markets for a long time, so kind of got to see a very different perspective than the marketing you've gotten to do. And we no longer do that. We found it made more sense for our family to not try to do that any longer. But I mean, I was able to talk to people about where our beef was born, raised, harvested, stored in one zip code, and then brought to the very next zip code to be sold. So I think the people that are interested in that, the consumers who are open to that education, they're getting those at places like farmers markets and the specialty grocery stores that we're so lucky to have in California, whether that's an S&S grocery store or the family-owned one, you know, down the street that somebody has. I believe they can get that. I think the challenge is in the broader sense, if somebody is at you know, a large chain, so shall we say, right, grocery store, that I don't think those consumers are as interested, right? So I think the people willing are finding their source for it. I think the challenge is educating people that don't really seem to have that interest. Because to your point, you know, we can put the banners up even if sometimes they're on the wrong stuff. But and I think they're doing a great job in the promotion, but I think the people that want that have found that from another, they found the opportunity to that, and it's probably not at the more conventional stores.
One more quick comment. I do wonder about that, though, because, I mean, 10 years ago in the stores in my neighborhood, you couldn't get organic because people said, people don't want that. They're going to go to the specialty stores and get it, and they'll find it. But now, even the very, very low-cost grocery stores carry organic as well. So I do wonder if that isn't a failure on our part in terms of our imagination, in terms of kind of marketing on not influencing those who would be the people who are selling, you know, like working a little bit, working differently, just having a little bit more imagination as we approach the problem.
I think a lot of the issue is the buyers. They have price points, and if they can buy it at a lower price outside of the U.S., they'll do it. I think Neil.
Well, it's
Right. Yep.
well, and it's a misuse of Martin Luther King Jr.'s famous quote, but as a relentless capitalist, you have to acknowledge the arc of capitalism bends toward efficiency, and this is what you get, right? Food miles runs completely the other direction from that, and that's not what any of us want, but it's a reality of the marketplace, what we're up against.
Right. All right, we're going to switch over to public comment for any item, pardon me, for this subject, sorry, this panel.
Can't help it, this is an exciting topic. Brother's a farmer, I'm a farmer. It's tougher to be a farmer in California or the United States, period. There's just all kinds of complicated things you can't explain. I get truckloads full of grapes from Peru. They're paying me $1,800 a load to get rid of it, because the cows don't want to go to the dump with it. But it costs $850 in labor to get it off. It costs another $400 to haul off the cartons. I got $100 left over, and my cows bloated on because it was such sweet sugar. Now, how did they get it? They're paying $1,800 a load to get rid of their grapes up here from Chile. I mean, we just can't put our heads around stuff like that, but it happens. Labor, I wanted to address, though, is that I always feel that we're underpaid our workers. Guy out there working in my dairy in the Santa Ana winds and the rain, slugging through the mud and pulling calves out at all hours of the night, should be able to make better than minimum wage that we got. So he should be able to support his family, I think. And when we compete with Mexico, which is cheap in labor, but no one talks about the attorneys and the workman's comp that we pay and all the bills that they don't pay in Mexico. Those are the real issues that we pay, all those things. And we need to get that equalized on food coming across that border. I don't know if you know the Elmores or not, but Howard went down there and make all his money and growing the tomatoes down on the other side. But he told me, he says, the labor's, $2 an hour, but the guy's digging that ditch. You gotta have another guy there to tell him to stop, otherwise you'll go all the way to the coast. And then he said, the roads, they're terrible. They're blowing out $400 tires all the time. The infrastructure of the electricity down there break down in their plants and the coolers and stuff like that. And it's very, very expensive to do that down here. In the United States, we have a lot of that, so it's well worth it. But our biggest problem, I still say in agriculture, is with the dairy, as with farmers, is we're too good. The technology is coming on us so fast. If you had produced 50 pounds of milk back in Chino in 1978 when I went there, you were one heck of a dairyman. Today, that doesn't even come close. You gotta be 100 pounds. We improve all the time. We cut more acres of hay down quicker with the bigger swathers we have. We just blow through stuff. I mean, we're really good at it. And then the export. We all got hooked on the export, sending the stuff to Japan. Then it became China. And then when China wants to shut the door on us for a period, it breaks everybody. We build an economy up to handle export. I'm a big local guy, stay in California the whole 9 yards. But we can't pass up that money, those farmers can't, because if they weren't there doing it. So it's our kids being able to take over in our jobs and stuff like that, we just have to be real that it's a tough world out there. And capitalism, we have to be able to fight and survive. And we do like government intervention in some areas, but the bottom line is you're never going to be able to solve all those problems because there's just too many unique things going on in so many different aspects, legal, labor, all those things, the marketplace and what's popular at the time, and packaging. I know we innovate all the time. Some things work, some things don't. It's a very tough industry, but it's tough everywhere. So you guys got a tough job. We'd love to see the small farmers stick around, small guys, small dairies. And by the way, the bigger you are, the more money you lose. Okay?
Very true. Thank you, Craig.
If you'd like to make public comment on this agenda item, please use your hand icon and I can unmute your line. I'm seeing no public comment at this time.
Well, both of you, thank you for coming in. Great to see you both. And appreciate all your comments today. Very, very helpful. All right, we are going to move to board discussion. We're going to have Doria go through this, or
Yeah, Dory, did you want to?
did you want to present your or comments on regenerative farming?
Yeah, so in everyone's packet today is a letter from Dawn regarding the progress on coming up with a proposal for a definition for regenerative agriculture for use in programs and policies in the state of California. This is a project that was started as a project of the board coming from Ag Vision in order to really come up with a set definition for this term because it was already being used in some state policies, but not having one consistent definition that can become really problematic. And so this letter outlines the kind of process that the board and the committees associated with it, the working group, has gone through in order to come up with a draft definition that's going to come to the board in future meetings. And yeah, so it started with the CDFA's Environmental Farming Act Science Advisory Council putting forth a framework that was used to guide the process of arriving at the draft definition. From there, we convened a work group appointed by Secretary Ross of different representatives who were interested in helping to draft that title. That working group met 3 times in order to work through the definition in different stages. We also hosted a number of listening sessions and had an enormous amount of public participation at those listening sessions. I think hundreds of people participated in those listening sessions with hundreds of comments on the topic. And now we actually have arrived at a draft definition that you will find in the letter that's in the packet. And I don't know what else there is to say. It's going to come to the board and again pass it on from there.
Well, yeah, I've got to tell you, thank you for the work that you and your committee did, and I'll tell you what, that was a real job.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate everything you've done, and to get it to this point, and to bring it back to the board.
Right. And just to say, I did very little outside of just showing up and trying to add good comments. I would really love to thank the CDFA staff who really lifted such a load, and the folks from Sacramento State helped to facilitate the process, right. And then all the work group members and Bryce, who also one of the other CDFA board members here who helped to participate in the whole thing. It was definitely a group effort, and other people carried so much more weight than I did. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I just
Go
wanted
ahead.
to add one thing on timing, and that is at the work group meeting last week, there was a vote on putting this definition forward. And everyone was in favor of putting it forward, but about half of the group would like to be able to provide their own comments for the board's consumption, because the board will make the final decisions on this. So the deadline for those submissions is at the end of this week. So it'll be between staff and the chair and the state board president and Josh to be able to determine which board meeting to bring that back based on that input.
Definitely, and just if I could add from a staff perspective, I think there is the potential that we could include this on the September meeting, but we will discuss on that. There will be another public comment hearing on the draft definition on August 22nd, so that is out there. So I think the draft definition provided to the board, along with the comments being provided by committee members, in addition to the feedback that we received from the upcoming listening session, will provide some good input for the board to kind of consider in September. And I will work with the committee chair and with the board president to kind of develop kind of what our strategy is for September and possibly October in terms of re-engaging with the public on the definition.
And yeah, I encourage our board to take this home, take a good look at it, and make your comments. And we'll take a look at additional comments coming in and discuss this at our September board meeting.
And maybe just to add one more thing for everyone who is getting this definition now, all of the notes, the comments, everything, all the recordings from the listening sessions are all available on the CDFA website. So if you're interested in how we arrived at this definition, you can actually look and see all of the background, like all of the steps that we took to get here.
And again, just verifying it is still a draft definition that has not come before the board for consideration, and the board will take action to make a recommendation to the secretary.
There we go. Joy?
I just want to say congratulations.
I agree.
I did have one other thing real quick as well in regards to board scheduling. Our September meeting is September 3rd. October is October 1st. We did have a recommendation if the board was interested in considering moving that date to potentially align with the FIRA conference that is happening in Woodland. And I think since we do not have a quorum, that's maybe something I can do a poll via email out to everyone. But those dates are the 22nd to the 24th of October. And I can make a recommendation out to everyone on that time if we would like to move the October board meeting to that date. And also, because of some conflicts with the chair, president, we will maybe need to either cancel or reschedule the November 5th meeting.
And I appreciate that.
Let's have a coup.
One of the things to follow up as well is that when the board requested that the department create a small-scale farm advisory committee and also a BIPOC advisory committee, part of the intent was also to have a joint session with both of those subcommittees with the board. And so we're hopeful this fall, either October or November, to make that happen. So we need to kind of coordinate on kind of how the best date can work on that as well. So some flexibility in scheduling is being requested.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to.
Yes, following the, thank you. Following the board's meeting on July 25th, which was a teleconference meeting in the evening where we had a discussion with the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, was able to talk about the statewide notification, agricultural use of restricted materials, and the notification system. The board did authorize at that meeting for the staff and board chair to kind of make a public comment to DPR. That public comment is included in your packet, as it also posted online for the public and was submitted to DPR on the August 1st deadline for public comment.
All right. We have one more item, which would be the public comment on items not on the agenda. If anyone in the room would like to make public comments, we'll start here, and then we will move to anyone who has an online comment. If you could keep it to 3 minutes or less, we'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, hello, my name is Mackie Hamblin. I'm a UC Davis graduate with a degree in animal science and equine emphasis. I've also worked in various veterinarian offices as a vet tech and am now a horse trainer. I run a small women-owned business at the Orange County Fairgrounds Equestrian Center. This equestrian center is the 32nd District Agricultural Association under your jurisdiction. I'm here today because the equestrians and the horses of the 32nd DAA are in crisis. The executive director at the Orange County Fairgrounds has padlocked the arenas and turnout areas over a contract. This action confines our horses to their stalls and walkways. This is affecting the horses' health very negatively and can even cause colic or possibly death. I understand that the 32nd DAA has its own board of directors, but since the lockdown, they have been unresponsive and have allowed the executive director to take these harmful steps towards our horses. This lockdown is a result of an unconscionable contract. The contract is simply stated unfair and one-sided. The contracts are written so poorly that we could be on the hook for the maintenance and upkeep of the equestrian center, which is owned by the state. We've submitted signed contracts with edits made, and the executive director has rejected these edits. Rather than negotiate, we were issued eviction notices in the middle of a horse show and now all exercise areas are padlocked. The CEO has refused to meet, discuss, or negotiate anything with the contracts. These actions are despite many promises made by the board of directors, as well the directors of the direction they've given the CEO. The Equestrian Center went from earning $100,000 per year for the state for more than a decade to losing $1 million in 1 year, thanks to the new contract the executive director hired to work at the Equestrian Center. The contractor is the fairground's own street sweeping company. They have no experience with horses and have been bilking the fairgrounds for hundreds of thousands of dollars. My ask today is that you assign someone to audit the Orange County Fairgrounds, or at the very least, assign someone who can work as a mediator to help bridge the gap and allow the equestrians to negotiate a contract that is feasible to sign. We immediately need to have the executive director of the OC Fairgrounds of the 32nd DAA take these padlocks off of these exercise areas. This is a massive animal welfare issue and requires immediate attention in your jurisdiction. I would also like to say it was really nice to see a meeting run so well. I've only ever been exposed to the meetings at the fairgrounds of the Orange County, and many times I've had my public comment bumped to the beginning, the middle, the end unknowingly. So it was really nice to be able to have such good organization. So thank you for your time. I very much appreciate it. And I will be following up with you guys. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sounds like a job for me. Before you start that clock on me, I would like to explain something first. That I'm here really to apologize to everybody on the board for my treatment of Karen in previous meetings. At the end of the last meeting, I was approached by Mr. Gallo, who said, you know, your argument's compelling, but your description of Karen is not right. He says, she's a compassionate woman, she cares, and that's all I can tell you. So all weekend it bothered me when I was away. And so I called him on the phone. I said, you know, I really respect you and what you're saying. And I said, see if you can put together a meeting and I can come see Karen. She was kind enough to allot me a half hour, when I think a full hour almost. And so I want to apologize because my method of attack was, all I could see was my people losing their jobs, losing dairies, and I was angry. And my anger went to the boss. That was you. Without having conversations like we used to have before, a long time ago, we talked, we weren't talking, and I'm getting everything secondhand, thirdhand, and I can see how, I know how big your job is. I know how you depend on your staff. I know how you depend on all those things. And you also have your character is different than mine, is where you're almost like, I can hear my mother telling me, you know, you're smart enough, Craig, make these other guys happy, to put this thing together. You want everyone to be able to be in that fold. I get that. So with that, I already apologize to you, but now I apologize to your board because they're an outer extension of that. And Mr. Cameron, I formally submit that apology to her. The last thing is my time, I'll start my 3 minutes to be fast, I probably won't even use that, is I do have that petition that we didn't have the dates, signatures on there. We have them handwritten, we sent them back out. I might give that to you when I'm done. It's just a petition. And I also included in there the 3 things and when we talked about the equalization of quota, you asked a question about that to Peter. I've got some of that here for you so you could read that if you have time. But it talks about quota should have been gone back in 1972, and this is what this is about. And so that's some reading. The one issue with me on this, and I'm going to continue to fighting for it to get rid of quota. I love what you're doing with that thing, meeting us halfway on that, and hopefully that goes. And I told Peter I support that, and I'll be at the meetings this week trying to support that. But to me, it's an issue of we're working compulsory. We have to work. We have to pay, and we don't get anything back for it. It's against the law, in my opinion, of the Constitution. It was stated by Michelle Diaz at one meeting. It's we institute a tax without a direct benefit for us, which is in violation of the Constitution. I call it slavery. And so I love the way Abraham Lincoln handled it. There was the Nebraska-Kansas compromise, the Missouri compromise, you had the Crittenden compromise, you had Henry Clay and Calhoun in the Senate and Stephen Douglas from up north, all trying to placate the South. Well, it's been around for 200 years, so why isn't it good? Quota's been around for 50 years, so why isn't that legal? The banks are, everybody's intertwined, it's a culture. Quota, it's a culture. Well, Abraham Lincoln said, we're gonna end it, and we're gonna end it today. You can't do that, you can't just stop this, the devastation it'll cause. He says, deal with it. That's how I feel about quota. They've been taking $8 billion from us for a long time. It's a lot of money, and we get nothing back in return. And our kids and stuff, we didn't find out about it until 2018 at the meetings. And so I'm going to continue to try to get rid of it, but I will do it with more deference and respect for you, Karen. Thank you.
Thank you, Craig.
Thank you, Craig. That wasn't necessary, but I appreciate it. Thank you.
You want to check online?
Yes. If you'd like to make public comment for items not on the agenda, please use your hand icon and I will unmute your line. Sharon, your line is unmuted.
Yes, hi. Thank you so much for taking my call. My name is Sharon Fells. I'm a resident of Sacramento County. I actually called in June of this year to discuss the equine medication prevention or monitoring program, EMMP, which falls under your jurisdiction. I tried calling in July of this year as well. I was all scheduled to be on that call, and lo and behold, the meeting was canceled. And unfortunately, it was not disclosed anywhere on your website. So a little bit disappointed by taking the time out of my busy schedule to find out that there was no meeting being held and there was no new date scheduled. So I emailed and found out about today's meeting. So hopefully you'll be more diligent in keeping up to date with the website and the meetings. So back to the issue at hand, which again is this equine medication program. And I'm not sure who oversees this committee, but whoever that might be worth taking a look at what's going on with this organization or this group. As it's just a little frustrating being a horse enthusiast in Sacramento County and seeing the lack of work that they're doing, yet continuing to charge fees for pretty much any horse show in California. And in fact, those fees were increased in 2022 from $8 to $14, really to satisfy their expenditures, which predominantly were based on salaries, overhead, office expenditures, not on providing any additional services to the horse community at all. In fact, if you look at their meeting minutes, which is another issue, because the latest meeting was, or the only meeting this year was in March. The meeting minutes have not been posted yet because they need to be approved at the next meeting, which supposedly is March 24th. However, there's no indication anywhere of when or if that's actually taking place. So anyway, the latest minutes we have are going back to October of 2023. And the issues that were discussed at that meeting were equine diseases, program updates, which basically was saying that in the whole state of California, there were only 5 testers providing testing of all of these horse shows, which again goes back to my question, well, where's all the money going if it's not paying for these tests to be run? And actually, there's no indication of what the results of any of the tests were. In fact, in 2022, there were 69,770 equines entered into events and obviously paying that drug fee, yet only 184 urine samples were taken and 92 blood samples were taken. And nowhere in the meeting minutes does it indicate what the results of those tests were. To me, the question is, why are you testing if you're not providing the results as well? Because interestingly enough, California is the only state that does this drug testing. And
Sharon,
partly,
could you wrap it up, please?
well, I guess, yes, I will. Thank you for your time, and I'll write a letter to stay on top of this. But I just want to bring to the board's attention the EMMP committee and what they're doing and not doing. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment.
I'm seeing no further public comment at this time.
Thank you, Josh. Well, we want to thank everyone who came and presented today. Really appreciated the time, the effort. Thank you, board, for coming in today. I know we all have a lot going on this time of the year, so very much appreciated. So we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. We'll see you in September.
Thank you, Julie and Leah, for translation. Thank you.